Hi, everyone. Today we are highlighting the upcoming NEC Symposium by the NEC Society. It is September 7th through the 10th in Chicago, and it's not too late to register. Listeners of the Incubator actually can get 10% off registration using the promo code Incubator, INCUBATOR. And it's a tremendous conference. We've had the good fortune to attend for the last two conferences. So definitely take a look at the agenda at nexsociety.org. We are here to give people a sneak peek at some of the very dynamic discussions happening at the next symposium. And I am absolutely thrilled to introduce to you all Dr. Garabet Yeretssian, who is part of the next symposium faculty this year. Dr. Yeretssian, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And it's our pleasure. I want to tell people a little bit about you. You hold a PhD in biotechnology, cell and molecular biology, and additionally completed a postdoctoral fellowship studying host microbe interactions at gut mucosal surfaces. Additionally, you're a senior program manager on the scientific strategy and partnership team at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative since 2022. And within the team, you oversee initiatives that support the development of scalable technologies to deepen insights into cellular behavior with a focus on human metabolism, immune systems, inflammation, and rare disease. Previously, you served as director for the Helmsley Charitable Trust Crohn's Disease Program. And prior to that, you're an assistant professor in the Immunology and Tisch Center Institutes at Mount Sinai, leading research on innate immune and cell death mechanisms in inflammatory bowel diseases, colorectal cancer, and other GI disorders. So it's no surprise with these qualifications that the Next Society team wanted you to join them for the next symposium this year. Before we get into your role at the next symposium, tell me a little bit about your role on the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative team. What does that look like?
Yes, and thanks for the for the reflection on the bio. So at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, or CZI for short, I do help lead initiatives that, as you mentioned, focus on leveraging scalable technologies and understanding these technologies on how we can sort of use them to characterize better and understand better cells and cell behaviors in the context of health and disease. And if you take like necrotizing enterocolitis or NEC, I mean, that is the scenario where disease sort of state, understanding that disease state will help us eventually better characterize and better sort of understand the pathophysiology, what is driving the disease, how things are starting, and leveraging technology that we support at CZI will help us do that. I've been working at this interface of technology and science and biology for many years now, both in the interface of health and understanding inflammatory and chronic inflammatory diseases. Rare disease has been top of mind because we have a big focus on rare diseases at CZI, from capacity building to patient organizations and sort of helping patients be at the center and around the table to make those decisions, to actually understanding and better characterizing those rare conditions.
I love that. And obviously, we're here to talk about neck, but tell me a little bit about the breadth of kind of diseases that you guys are looking at with this type of technology.
So historically, we've been disease agnostic. So understanding health, it always helps you to understand disease. But more and more, our emphasis and focus is on rare conditions. Um, Neck is one area of disease, but because of these agnostic components, we've been really thinking more about how can we bring the patients, patient organizations, clinicians, scientists, all of sort of the community together to be able to tackle these very complex conditions. So that is the component that actually CZI is known for, is how we can work collaboratively by bringing the technology to understand the diseases, and it's truly game changing. It's really an investment can allow you to break down the silos and start to think about
Mm.
these conditions from the sort of bottom up rather than from the top down. So thinking about what patients' needs are and prioritizing those needs first.
I love that. And I'm gonna come back to you talking about breaking down silos. We love that concept here on the podcast. But a little bit more about the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and I'll be honest, I learned a lot in preparing for this conversation. It's not just this investment in funding research for rare disease, but this kind of commitment to patient-led organizations through the Rare as One network. Again, like you said, highlighting um, really the lack of funding for rare diseases. But what I think is so cool is they're not just saying like, here's the money, figure it out. They really have a kind of committed network to assisting with the scientific research. Can you talk a little bit about some of that infrastructure?
Yes, of course, I'm one part of the puzzle, but actually there are so many other colleagues that are leading this effort, especially when it relates to capacity building and the Rare as One network. It just all started, I think, from the concept that patient-led research is really central and important to
Totally.
move and to remove these silos and boundaries, and working with the patients for the patients is more important. So how can we motivate clinicians and scientists to think in that direction and make sure that they partner early on with patients to understand what their needs are and how to tackle those needs together. So this is a big effort. Actually, the Rare as One network now is around 90 plus patient-led organizations that are supporting diseases across a broad spectrum of rare conditions. And the idea is to build capacity and allow these patient organizations to be powerful and to lead the research in their fields, and be real partners of the researchers and clinicians.
I love that. And, from our time interviewing people now across kind of the spectrum with who are collaborating with the Next Society and the Next Symposium, this is totally the mission kind of with what the NEC Society is trying to do, bring parents and patients and clinicians and scientists all together. And not just that, this really multidisciplinary technique where we're bringing surgeons and nutritionists and psychologists and adult physicians so that we can do exactly like you said, breaking down silos and learning from one another instead of like reinventing the wheel. And it's been so neat to see that. Last year, we spoke to some physicians who were studying adult GI pathologies and how we're translating that to help understand the neonatal response to neck. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so exciting?
I mean, this is an area that dear and close to my heart. I mean, I've worked in the gut inflammation field for a while, and you've mentioned some of my accomplishments, at least like in terms of the roles that I held in the past related to gut inflammation and GI diseases. But one thing that is interesting in terms of like the next society and the work that the whole community, the NEC community, is leading. Just going back to the Rare as One network and what we've done. So the next society was part of the Rare as One network, but what we helped build through that support and funding is the skills and research strategy and data sharing approaches and governance structures and community engagement capacities at the next society that allowed them to bring this whole community together and actually to apply to other funding support from CZI in a portfolio of actually research-driven, specific technology development and leveraging that tool to be able to characterize and understand better neck. So from that perspective, it's really exciting if you think about how much you can do by bringing this community together and trying to drive research forward and move things that actually haven't been possible but with only a patient organization alone or a researcher and scientist alone. So thinking about actually how much could be done by sort of leveraging and understanding a disease and the characteristic and the complexities of this condition, it's really valuable. I might have not answered your question, but if you don't mind repeating
No,
it.
I think that's perfect. I think that's perfect. I'm so in awe of researchers like you in your past life, doing kind of this bench work, translational work, whatever it might be, and then saying, we've got to take another step forward, and we've got to collaborate with the community. Before we logged on, we were talking about it, the lead time from, research work to being able to provide things really clinically to patients at bedside. And I mean, that's more than a decade right now. And so it sounds like, using the expertise of people like you who have really understand research, really understand inflammatory, conditions, can help, super speed the process of getting things to patients.
Yes, and I think now I remember your question more concretely in terms of comparing with sort of adult onset GI diseases and how actually we can learn from these um, sort of conditions to reflect back and then see how we can apply some of the learnings to neck. And absolutely, I think there's a lot of parallels in these conditions, and that's why our approach, at least at CZI, has been disease agnostic, because we believe that there are many shared mechanisms and approaches that could bring and converge some of these conditions together. And maybe one treatment that has been developed for, let's say, Crohn's disease could be really sort of repurposed for necrotizing, at least like for some patients with neck. So definitely lots of learnings in terms of mechanisms of disease, lots of learnings in terms of biomarker discovery, of course, using and leveraging some of the omics approaches and tools that are now state of the art and have developed so much in the past decade, that will allow us to advance really fast and more understanding these debilitating conditions that unfortunately affect infants very, very early stage in their life, with such a fragile, actually, structure in terms of their tissues and their organs. So if you think about the gut and how sort of sensitive it is at these early stages when the microbiome is colonizing, and we're sort of getting adapted to these sort of environmental conditions. Imagine triggers like neck and how damaging these could be for these infants. So there's a lot of learnings from other GI diseases that we could apply for neck.
Yeah, and I think what's so exciting is it's a two-way street, right? We're hoping to learn things from some of those adult pathologies, but potentially something we identify about, like you said, the triggers and the ongoing GI development will circle back to the other community that we were borrowing from to begin with. That's so cool. That's really
Yeah,
neat.
absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about what you're going to speak on during the symposium this year.
I mean, I do know that it's going to be related to inflammation, different technologies, such as thinking about organoids and iPSCs, and how we can leverage some of these sort of cells that we grow in vitro now, and we're able to sort of screen drugs and see phenotypes of cells and understand better what happens when there's a gene that is missing or a gene that is overexpressed. We can also learn actually how sort of these cells interact with the microbes that sort of cover our gut sort of mucosal surfaces. What happens during inflammation? What are the immune cells doing? How are they tackling this sort of really fragile gut system in the context of neck? So I think these are topics that we'll be discussing about. And I mean, my expertise relies more on the sort of early stages research, basic research, and more translational rather than the clinical components where we are thinking about therapy. So more biomarker discovery, early stage of understanding pathophysiology and mechanistic approaches of the disease.
Can you highlight any of those things for us? Well, I mean, I like I said, yeah, I'm a clinician, but we've got listeners that span the gamut, and I think even for the clinician, I think it helps us understand what we're seeing at the bedside when we are hearing about um, the research. Like, what are you learning about biomarkers? What are the potential targets? I think even as somebody who, let's say, is just at the bedside, I think we can learn so much and see the parallels in our patients from what you guys are seeing in the basic science.
Absolutely. So the traditional approach to biomarker discovery has been really focused on plasma, serum level, sort of biomarkers, and what we could detect actually by taking just a sample of blood. In this scenario, it's very different. I mean, thinking about neck and how much you could do with just profiling and understanding the tissue and what is happening at the gut level and at that surface where there's the interactions with the microbes. So there's a lot we could learn. So some of the technologies that are being used now more and more are sort of single cell transcriptomics approaches where you are profiling and understanding how genes are regulated and how genes are expressed in each individual cell. And by doing that, actually, you are sort of tapping into a new category of biomarkers that are cellular biomarkers. You understand actually what is the phenotype of that specific cell in the disease context and how eventually you'll be able to treat that cell and the phenotype of the cell rather than thinking about treating a systemic marker that might be just a consequence and not the cause of what is happening at the tissue level. So those are sort of approaches that now are extremely valuable and being adopted and used. So there are many other omics approaches that are being developed as we speak. There are some that are at the tissue level. There are some at the cell level. So you can think about proteomics. You can think about metabolomics of cells in addition to the transcriptomics, which is really great, and it generates tons of data that will allow you to not only think about that individual patient, but also how you can scale it to understand better other patients and what are some of the commonalities, what are some of the differences, and where these converge to be able to make those decisions of what is the best treatment or therapy for these individual patients.
I love that. And if you could see into the future, do you suspect that this will help us with prevention or diagnosis, or like you said, treatment? Or is this something that might help us with all three?
Hopefully, I mean, if we want to be ambitious and we want to really have big hopes, hopefully all three. But as initial stages, I do see that there's a big potential for prevention when it comes to
Mm.
preventing these diseases. If we could implement some of these marker identifications or biomarker identifications early on, just after birth, and even some maybe pre-birth, maybe there are ways for us to think about. So in utero, what are some of the, not interventions, but some of the sort of ways for us to detect some markers early on? Those could be extremely valuable for in terms of prevention. When it comes to diagnosis and treatment, those are trickier scenarios because the time frame for the development of the disease and sort of the severity are quite fast. So if we can sort of bet on how can we prevent and eventually get interventions earlier on rather than thinking about diagnosis and treatments, those could be much more impactful as early stages. In terms of diagnosing and treating patients, I'm sure that the existing tissues biobanks and efforts that the next society has spearheaded in the past few
Mhm.
years, those will be very useful resources for the community to start thinking about what are some of the signatures that are real signatures of disease to help us understand the pathophysiology. And once we get to the bottom of those, we'll be able to leverage and hopefully repurpose some of the existing drugs to accelerate the path for therapy for these patients.
I love that. And there's something that you mentioned about kind of these early markers, and especially with your expertise in some of the other kind of GI diseases. It sounds like there's this push to evaluate that maybe some babies are at higher risk than others. Say, for example, we're seeing that in the adult community, higher risk for maybe colorectal cancer. Maybe that's genetic, maybe that's environmental, maybe that's something about the in utero development. And I think as a clinician, we sometimes say, why was it this baby that this wasn't the baby that was supposed to get neck, based on what we know about it, but they did, or this was the highest risk baby and they didn't get neck. So it sounds like we're also trying to um, narrow down that question of why some babies and not others.
Yes, so in at least the adult GI field, if you think about Crohn's and colitis, there's been a lot of push in terms of thinking what are some of the markers that will allow us to classify or reclassify patients based on specific signatures that we see either in blood or in specific cells of the gut, and which category of or group of patients will respond to a certain treatment versus another. And this is very common also in rare diseases. In rare disease, heterogeneity is a very common topic that we discuss and sort of reflect on a lot. Nexus and the sort of neck as a condition is also across the spectrum. So you don't have one patient responding the same way as another, and you don't know when the disease will sort of start and how fast it's going to sort of develop and progress. So there's definitely groups of neck patients that or individuals with neck, which I prefer to use than patients, and how we can eventually regroup or reclassify these individuals to either benefit from a certain therapy, or will benefit from a certain diet, or will be in a category where they're more severe, and we need to sort of approach these in a very different way. So yes, something for us to learn from other diseases, but also to think about that neck is very different than other diseases as well. So what differentiates neck, and how we can bet also on that sort of unique aspect of neck that is this short time frame, very severe, very quick development of the condition.
Yeah, and we will eventually be running short on time, so I want to move on to another area of expertise for you, and it's really this funding piece. And like you have described, we know that there is just such neck can be so catastrophic. And we really, as a clinician at the bedside primarily, I feel that, we're worried about it all day, every day. And we just recognize how baby can go from well to unwell so quickly. And I recognize that diseases like neck have a relatively low incidence across an overall population, so that funding this type of work can be a real problem. And yet we know there's a significant impact in terms of morbidity. There's a high percentage of mortality. We know there's a lot of healthcare expenditure associated with neck and the sequelae of neck and infection and things like that. A lot of healthcare utilization, because many of these babies will require a lot of care subsequent to a neck diagnosis. So we realize at the bedside, we see it and we say something has to be done about this. We're so grateful to the scientists that study it. But I was hoping we could talk about this critical need, this kind of a unique collaboration between scientists and clinicians and grant organizations, especially for this topic of rare diseases, where potentially there's not a lot of money in the therapeutics, or we don't see a lot of government funding because it represents such a small segment of the population.
Yes, I mean, this is the exciting part of the work. If you think about it, that's one of the things I love about my role, and is really thinking about how we're translating this complex science into something people can actually use. And then this is where sort of Next Society and other patient organizations come into play, where they help us actually partner with scientists and clinicians and families, and funding those type of efforts is really rewarding. So if you think about the funding, where the Next Society has played a major role in we call it patient-partnered collaboration. So how can we bring the patient perspective again at the center of building the research portfolio, and where all these communities come together to work together towards this one mission or goal that they have. It is a very competitive space. It is unfortunately underfunded when it comes to finding resources for these type of efforts to support and fund and accelerate. I feel fortunate to be able to work with such teams, and we're able to support a few sort of efforts or initiatives related to the patient partners collaborations. These are transformative approaches that again bring in different perspectives. They have inspiring mission, and really the again, the most important aspect of it is the patients and the diseases and how we can better understand and accelerate biomarker discovery, accelerate diagnosis, accelerate therapies for these individuals suffering from debilitating conditions. So it's really motivating. The funding space, it's unfortunately scarce. There's not a lot of funding that comes from big governmental institutions that allowed this type of sort of collaborative, cohesive work together. Um, and I really feel fortunate to be part of an organization that is allowing us to do this type of work and continue doing work related to rare diseases.
Do you have any recommendations for physicians or scientists who might be hesitant in looking for kind of this private type of grant funding?
So our funding is private, but at the same time, we put out requests for applications. So they're open calls. Everyone is sort of eligible to apply. And this type of partnership was really very unique because the requirement was to have the patient organization as part of the sort of grantee group. So the patient organization had to have a lead PI or principal investigator as part of this grant mechanism. And without that requirement, it wasn't sort of they weren't eligible to apply for getting a grant. So my advice will be share your research early, often, talk about it with patients to make sure that you're communicating your science in an inspiring way to everyone who needs to know about it, including patients, patient families, patient advocates. It is important to know what the work is being done and how impactful it could be for the communities that we serve. Um, it's important to prioritize patient needs first because our priorities as a researcher, my priorities in the lab were not the same as the priorities of a patient. And it's very hard to understand that when we are in a climate where we need to get funding to get promoted, we need to get funding and papers to get sort of internally our sort of tenures. It's very, very challenging. And it's important to consider that we understand that, but it's very sort of rewarding to work with patients and patient organizations early on and very often. So my advice will be to really seek for those opportunities and make sure to stay close to what the needs are of the communities.
I love that. And I know we've been talking specifically about kind of the rare is one call, but it looks like on the Chan Zuckerberg .com website, there are lots of grant resources and lots of funding opportunities. Can you tell us a little bit both about how people can find out more about what you're doing and some of those other grant opportunities? I think you guys put out a call twice a year. Is that right?
No, the calls are very. It's more than twice a year. There are multiple calls.
Okay,
The Rares One
great.
network is very different. So the I spoke about the patient partner collaboration. It's a different initiative. We do work very
Mhm.
closely with the Rares One network a team, but also with the patient organizations. For example, the Next Society they were funded through a different mechanism, which is called the Patient Partners Collaborative, sort of RFA, and that was in partnership with a couple of institutions, including University of North Carolina. Many of the investigators who are part of the faculty of the next symposium, who were also awarded the grant with the leadership of the Next Society. And so we do have, again, very diverse portfolios of grants and multiple RFAs a year. I think the best way to reach us is to chat with us and pick our brains on ideas that you have and things you're excited about. We do support basic research in many sort of aspects, from technology development to really basic biology question and hypothesis-driven approaches, but also rare disease efforts. So, for example, we are working now very diligently on characterizing rare diseases at scale. So, thinking about how we can bring multiple rare diseases, even though they don't belong to the same category. Let's say GI diseases with neurodegenerative disease, and try to understand if they have any shared mechanism or shared pathophysiology, and how we can tackle or target that shared mechanism mechanism rather than thinking about sort of treating symptoms of the disease or phenotypes of diseases. So understanding those shared approaches will be very important. And we're, of course, leveraging omics approaches and other sort of tools and technologies that have been developed in the past decade or so, trying to see how much data we could generate. And of course, leveraging more recently artificial intelligence to try to think
Mhm.
about predictive modeling and what type of data is needed to sort of feed into this type of modeling approaches to avoid always to rely on patient samples and biorepositories. What if we could actually start now predicting some of the responses that patients are having, and maybe treat them directly rather than spending years and years collecting samples and generating data. So hopefully the data that we've generated so far and data that will be generated in the past few years, in the coming few years, sorry, will allow us to sort of start generating some of these models that will help us better prevent, treat, and manage diseases.
I love that. So people can reach out and they can find some of those requests for our applications, the RFAs at the website. And I wanted to also highlight some of the meetings, a wide range of scientific meetings, some of which require you to be a grantee recipient, but some of them do not. And I thought that there's a whole array of things that I think might interest people in our community. So thank you for highlighting that work. We're looking forward to hearing your official talks at the next symposium. And so, as a reminder for anyone who wants to learn more about the Next Society, you can find them at nextsociety.org. You can read about their research, award opportunities that they have coming down, especially for trainees and early career neos, scientists, surgeons, education, and advocacy. And of course, connecting with families and connecting families to one another. The next symposium is this September 7th through the 10th, and be sure to use code Incubator for 10% off. Dr. Yeretssian, thank you so much for being on with us today, sharing the insight into what you all are doing and helping us protect babies from neck.
Thank you, Daphne. This was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.